Hello, in this video, I'm going to address the meaning of a few terms that we will come across while talking about Native Americans. You must all have heard of the story of how Christopher Columbus set out to find a sea route to India. Instead, he reached a series of different land masses. He mistakenly named the people living in those lands as Indians. Later, another Italian navigator, Amerigo Vespucci, proved that these lands were not part of Asia and was instead a completely different region. This became known as America. Since Columbus had used Indians to refer to the people living there, they came to be called American Indians. Remember that these names came about from the world view of the white colonizer. The people did not call themselves as Indians. Would you accept a name given to you by an outsider? Or would you rather like people to call you by a name that you have chosen for yourself? Unfortunately, these names got stuck as they were used by the people in power and was in use for a long time. The Native Americans or the American Indians were desperate to get rid of all the derogatory meanings associated with their names given to them by the outsiders. They were unhappy with the use of this Indian as it came about from a mistake of Columbus. They are not Indians, we are Indians. Then came the use of the term Native Americans. So instead of American Indians, shall we try Native Americans? This was an attempt to be politically correct. As America as a country began to grow, there were several groups of people who were part of it. There were Africans, Italians, the Irish, and so on. So groups became identified as hyphen American. So each of these groups were given names such as African American, Irish American, Italian American, and so on. For the original inhabitants of the land, the correct term became Native American. Now there was a problem with the term native. Native, or he is a native, or she is a native. It means first or primary, as they were the first inhabitants of the land. Okay, but native also has a derogatory or a negative connotation, as it could mean backward or primitive and hence ignorant. He is a native. We can use native in that sense as well. So you see, even the phrase Native American could not really get rid of this problem of outsiders' perspective. What about Red Indians? It is an offensive term, like I mentioned before. It is an offensive term. Now, why are they red? This term was popularized by the European settlers. The European settlers were prone to use color metaphors to name the people they subjugated. Now, they were the whites. The Africans were black for them. The East Asians like Chinese, the Mongols, they were yellow for them. Indians were brown. The color red got associated with the Native American population. There is another aspect for this term. Redskins. Redskins was also a term used to denote the body parts of the people who were killed by the colonizers. So the cowboys or these colonizers, they went about killing the Native Americans and they collected body parts as trophies. It might be a part of their scalp, or it might be their ear. So these colonizers brought body parts or the skins, literally the skins of these people, as to show that they have killed this many Native Americans. These body parts were taken as proof of the kill to boast as to how many Native Americans were killed by the white colonizer. See how this color red, or the term Red Indian or the red skin, brings back haunting memories of the past where their own people were murdered, massacred by the white man. I hope you got the relevance of this term, how insulting it is for these people. These people who were the original inhabitants of America were not a single group of people. There are many different peoples, hundreds in fact, bearing such names as Wampanoag, Cherokee, Seminole, Navajo, Hopi, and so on. These are the real names of these people, but we call them Native Americans, American Indians. But then they are different groups of people. There's another problem here. Some of these names are not names given by the tribes themselves. Mohawk is a Narragansett name meaning flesh eaters. Sioux is a French corruption of an Anishinaabe word for enemy. Similarly, Apache is a Spanish corruption of a Zuni word for enemy, while Navajo is from the Spanish version of a Teva word. See how a group gets a name from the perspective of its enemy or its friend. I'll give you another example. Suppose a flu spreads all over the world. Now you will find people giving it names to associate it with a particular country. It might be the same flu affecting all the countries, but then we have a tendency to connect this flu with the neighbor. So we have the Spanish flu, we have the French flu, with the English flu. It might be the same thing, but then we try to give this negative connotations to the other country. This has happened for several such diseases which have affected the world. So let us get back to our discussion on Native Americans. You will come across terms like indigenous. It means something or someone who originated in that land and not brought in from elsewhere. So the native population is also called the indigenous population. We can also have the indigenous crop. Alright. Another term is Aboriginal. This term comes from Latin and means from the origin, Aboriginal. And originally was a term used by Romans to refer to a group of people in Italy. So there were some people who were born and brought up in Italy, and the Romans used this term to address these people. Until 1910, this term was used to refer to various indigenous peoples. Today, this is more commonly understood as the indigenous population of Australia. The original inhabitants of Australia, they are more commonly known as the Aboriginals or the Aborigine. Britishers had colonized Australia and had driven out the native population to the remote parts of the continent. Those people are more commonly known as the Aboriginals. And many of the native Australian population were massacred, or they were completely wiped off the planet. A generation of children and youngsters were completely wiped off from their community. These people came to be known as the lost generation. Means they were completely taken away from their youth, from their childhood. Many of them were put to work in the houses of the white settlers. They were made slaves. They're completely lost. So this generation became known as the lost generation in Australia. It's a reference to the Aboriginal population. Now, this term Aboriginal is also used in the context of the indigenous population of Canada as well. Let's think about a very basic question. What if you're talking to a person who belongs to a indigenous population of America? How will you address her or him? We may be tempted to call them what we have been taught. Yes, sir has told us that it's American Indian, Native Americans. But it always comes down to preference. Whose preference? The preference of the person you are communicating with. You can politely ask that person, what do you want to be called? And whatever that person says, you listen to the person and then communicate accordingly. For all academic purposes, it is alright to use the terms American Indian or Native American. These terms are problematic, like we saw earlier, but they serve a purpose of communicating, as they have been around for such a long time and have also been mentioned in the legal system of America as terms to denote these peoples. I have been saying the word peoples. Peoples is right in the sense because there are groups of people. People is plural, but then we have several groups of people. So we can say peoples. Alright.